Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are going to be diving into an incredibly vivid and, well, terrifyingly colorful piece of history. We're breaking down a disaster that literally burned one of the world's greatest cities to the ground in just 4 days. All right, let's jump right in and travel back in time to 1666.
So here's a crazy question for you. How did a single spark defeat an entire city? I mean, it sounds completely impossible, doesn't it? Before 1666, London had survived plagues, political chaos, and the constant threat of foreign invasions. No army, no enemy fleet had ever managed to bring this sprawling metropolis to its knees, and yet a tiny, almost invisible speck of heat did exactly that. To understand how on earth that happened, we really need to look at the incredibly dangerous environment of the city itself at the time.
Section 1. London, the Tinderbox. Notice the sheer visual contrast we have here. Over on the right, you've got the modern, bright, colorful stone and brick city we all picture today, right? Wide, safe boulevards. But on the left, 1666 London was this dark, cramped, medieval maze. We're talking wooden timber houses smeared with tar, leaning so far out over these tiny streets that neighbors could actually shake hands from their top-floor windows. Add bone-dry thatched roofs into the mix, and alleys packed with old wooden barrels full of oil and tar. London wasn't just a city, it was basically a giant pile of kindling, perfectly arranged and just waiting for a match.
Section 2. The Fatal Spark.
Okay, let's walk through those critical first few hours. It all started just after midnight on September 2nd, in a little bakery on a street ironically named Pudding Lane. It belonged to a guy named Thomas Farner. Now, while historians still kind of debate the exact physics, the accepted truth is terrifyingly simple. A single, forgotten, glowing ember was left in the bakery's oven overnight. Just one ember. Within minutes, flames started climbing those dry wooden walls. Thomas and his family barely escaped out an upstairs window. But by the time they hit the street, the fire was already eagerly jumping to the highly flammable buildings right next door.
Now this is where it gets incredibly frustrating. The way the leadership responded tragically illustrates the fatal flaw of that night. When the Lord Mayor of London was woken up and told about the flames, he took one look and dropped this shockingly arrogant line. He assumed it was so small that a woman could, well, easily put it out herself. He figured it was just another minor fire, totally normal, and he went right back to bed. That single staggering moment of complacency, it practically doomed the city. By the time he or anyone else actually woke up to reality, the window to stop the fire had completely closed.
Section 3. The Unstoppable Inferno.
So a strong easterly wind picked up, acting like a giant bellows. It pushed the fire from rooftop to rooftop with unbelievable speed. Those riverside warehouses we mentioned, the ones stuffed with oil, tar, and brandy, they didn't just burn. They literally exploded into these massive blinding fireballs. The heat got so incredibly intense that the iron chains and locks on the city gates actually melted. Stone structures were cracking and popping like gunfire. Panicked residents were grabbing whatever they could carry, throwing their belongings into the River Thames, while the night sky turned this thick, suffocating, glowing orange that could be seen for miles across the countryside.
Now, you might be wondering, how did they even try to fight this? Keep in mind this is 17th century firefighting. Step 1, passing leather buckets of water down a line of completely exhausted people. Step 2, rudimentary hand pumps that couldn't produce nearly enough water pressure. And Step 3, using long metal hooks to physically rip down burning wooden houses to create a gap, a fire break to stop the spread. But against a raging wind-fed inferno, these primitive methods were entirely useless. The fire just laughed at them and outran every single attempt to contain it, day after agonizing day.
And this detail right here perfectly captures the sheer apocalyptic scale of the disaster. St. Paul's Cathedral, this massive, magnificent stone building where people had actually moved their belongings, thinking, stone doesn't burn, we're safe here. Well, even St. Paul's was swallowed by the heat. The temperature was so extreme that the massive stone roof cracked wide open and collapsed. The lead roofing entirely melted, creating this surreal, terrifying scene where actual glowing rivers of molten metal were flowing down the cobblestone streets. It's just wild to picture.
Section 4. Blame and Devastation.
After 4 relentless days, the wind finally died down and shifted. The fire breaks finally held and the flames subsided. But as the smoke cleared, the city was left to face a horrific reality. Let this number sink in for a second. 13,000. That is how many individual houses were reduced to absolute ash and rubble. The fire also consumed nearly 90 churches. All told, an estimated 80% of the city within the old Roman walls was completely wiped off the map. 4 days was all it took to erase centuries of architecture and history.
But the physical destruction is only half the story. 100,000, nearly a sixth of London's entire population, was left completely homeless overnight, just wandering the fields outside the city limits in total shock. Now, official records from the time claim remarkably few deaths. But actually, scratch that, modern historians know better. The fire burned so fiercely that it would have left absolutely no physical remains of the poorest victims trapped in those narrow alleys. Their deaths simply went entirely unrecorded in the chaos.
And, as is so often the case in human history, immense trauma breeds immediate paranoia. Rumors spread as fast as the fire itself. People desperately wanted someone to blame. They started accusing foreigners and foreign governments of deliberate sabotage. Which brings us to the deeply tragic story of Robert Hubert. He was a French watchmaker, widely believed to be innocent and possibly suffering from mental illness. But under the immense pressure and the sheer panic of a terrified public, he falsely confessed to starting the fire. He was publicly executed, only for later evidence to prove he couldn't possibly have been responsible. It's such a grim reminder of how fear can turn a society against innocent people just as destructively as any natural disaster.
Section 5. A City Reborn. But the story of London doesn't end in the ashes. This disaster actually sparked one of the most ambitious urban transformations in European history. To make absolutely sure this could never happen again, sweeping new laws mandated that houses be built of sturdy brick and bright, fire-resistant stone. Those dark, cramped streets, they were widened out to let in the light and stop flames from jumping across. Fire safety became an actual, enforceable priority. And perhaps most famously, Sir Christopher Wren redesigned St. Paul's Cathedral from the ruins, giving us that incredibly colorful, magnificent stone dome that still punctuates the London skyline today. The city was reborn, safer, stronger, and honestly, more beautiful.
So I want to pose a question to all of you, especially those of you watching this visual explainer from the rapidly growing, super dynamic cities across Pakistan and India. What can we learn today from the ashes of a 1666 disaster? Why does a 400-year-old fire still matter to our modern, colorful, fast-paced lives?
Ultimately, the Great Fire of London proves that comfort and complacency can turn into catastrophe overnight. The Lord Mayor ignoring that tiny spark? That is a massive lesson for all of us about ignoring the small warnings in our own societies. But equally, it shows us that tragedy forces us to rebuild stronger. The difference between total ruin and a glorious rebirth comes down entirely to what a society chooses to learn from its darkest moments. What are the small sparks in our world today that we might be ignoring? Think about that. If this visual journey through the flames of history captivated you, please share it with a friend